Okay, what we've talked about for the past few weeks, especially regarding slavery and religion, has been interesting to me because of how we relied so much on slaves for basic needs and how we weren't able to give them any of the basic needs in return, and how we just looked at them as if they were property. And I found it amazing how slaves could have everything taken away from them, but still were able to keep such amazing resilience throughout all of that time. And how they were able to do that by making connections with each other and when they were just being dehumanized by everyone else. And it made me think that if I was in their situation, like, I would think, oh, I should run away from this and try to escape. But when we discussed how dangerous it was and how 1,000 out of the 4 million slaves in the South were only able to escape, and those were mostly people like slaves that didn't have super strong connections with everyone else, because I never thought of it on the level of that was everything the slaves had really ever known, and all their family and connections and friends were all there. So if they were to run away, they would be free, but they wouldn't really know anyone or have any sort of connection with the outside world. And that made me kind of understand more that it probably didn't seem like a good risk for most of those slaves, and how they just wanted to stay where they were comfortable and surrounded by all their friends and family, even if it was a really bad situation to be in. And I did think it was really cool how a lot of the slaves they would have the connections with each other, but they would also be able to get married, and they could jump over a broom to signify it. And that reminded me of, I'm pretty sure it was history in high school at some point we talked about where they would jump over a broom, but we never went into depth about how it really affected, or like what it would have meant to them, or how it affected the slave owners too, and how they saw it as like getting more property, because then they would have kids that would also become slaves for them. So it was more like a free way for them to get more slaves, but then it also gave the slaves a sense of like connection within their life that was already so horrible. And I thought that was cool how it could also bring them a sense of autonomy. And I think that's extremely important because of how terrible they were treated. And it kind of made me wonder what like their headspace really would look like, and how that could be compared to something today, or like how we could even try to picture what that would have been like. And because I can't imagine how stressful it would have been also not knowing if your family or you would be ripped away within like the next day or week or month, or just never knowing what was going to happen. And it really also made us like the point of them being more property and wealth for their owners more prominent to me. And then another thing that slavery changed for people was through the cotton economy, and that also brought to my attention how it really made life for Southerners more comfortable because of how bad their economy was before. But then it also made it more unbearable for the slaves. But no one really thought of that at first. And I won't lie, I kind of didn't think about that in the beginning. I just thought about how the economy was affecting like the Southerners. And then it just seemed like a normal thing back then for no one to really think about how it was actually affecting the slaves. And it really shows that an economic growth can hide the moral failure and what's going on behind the scenes of what looks like a good situation because the economy was growing. But then taking a deeper look at slavery and all the ways that it would have like physically and intellectually affected all the enslaved people really helped me grow a deeper understanding, and how they would have felt seeing how they were treated through their own eyes, rather than just trying to feel bad for them, because I feel like that's what majority of people do when they look back at history of slaves, is we just kind of feel bad, but we don't really sit there and think about what they actually saw through their own eyes and how they were affected. And so I feel like that helped me try to have that type of perspective, rather than just being like, oh, that really sucked for them, and I guess it's good it's not really happening anymore. And I just thought it was kind of interesting how some people could have such strong views on slavery and trying to end it, but they were only able to do so much with a single voice, and that was what William Lloyd Garrison did, and how he specifically impacted me because of how he dedicated the Liberator to making a change, and with his quote of "I will be heard," and this was kind of like him saying that he would get people's attention through that, and I feel like that quote was more of a moral standing rather than a political one at the time, because he believed in getting justice and allowing the slaves to get immediate emancipation so that they could just be free and not have to go through everything that they did. And I feel like this kind of stand was very encouraging to the rest of the population surrounding them because of how they stayed very quiet and compliant with everything that's happening. No one really wanted to speak up during the time when it came to the topic of slavery and changing it. So I feel like his passion towards freeing the slaves really was more influential to people around him, and they kind of wanted to like back him up, and it gave him a little more like passion, I guess, to keep going. And then the last thing that really stood out to me was the connection between the Second Great Awakening and then Charles Finney, and how he thought, or how he taught, that people could choose the way they could choose if they were saved, and that living a good moral life showed strong faith. And so I thought it was cool how at this time it was a lot less people than I really expected. I thought there would be more at the time that were being religious, or like dominated to a church. And so I found that interesting, and I thought it was cool that he said that the idea gave people a sense of power and control over their own lives, kind of. And so they got to choose how they got to move on with their life. And it also made me think, though, what would happen if this was used to defend like unfair treatment or to control people. And this was kind of like in the Oneida, I think is how you say it, community that we talked about, and how they were trying to break away from the normal social rules. And they, while doing this, also took away some personal freedom from the women, at least, with how they just, like, their ideas of religion and how they kind of went about them. And it made me realize that even ideas meant to create equality or change can sometimes end up being controlling or unfair. And so that wasn't really fair to the women to have like such open relationships, I guess. And it was interesting how different it was from the Shakers. But it was kind of interesting just how different every type of religion worked, and how people would create their own based off of what other people were doing and how they liked some parts of it and didn't like other parts, so they just make their own and decide to go by that. So